والله يدعو إلى دار السلام ويهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a new episode of Focus Point. In today's episode of Focus Point, we are covering Al-Azhar and the West, Bridges of Dialogue. This conference is held under the supervision of the World Associations for Al-Azhar graduates. Join me to know more in this episode of Focus Point.
That in these critical times undermines all of the pretensions, the false claims to legality by extremists who specialize in massacre, in the mass murder of unarmed, non-combatant men, the mass murder of innocent women and of children. Extremists who specialize not in classic fiqh or usul ad-din, but who specialize instead in the subversion of the Muslim social order. And they do it all, astaghfirullah, in the name of God, His book, His prophet, and His ummah. The same distortion of Islam projected by extremists who are at work among Muslims is accepted as a true account of our religion by openly professed enemies of Islam in the West, who have emerged after 9/11 like insects suddenly surfacing from within the woodwork of modern Western civilization, to denounce Islam and to join forces, metaphorically speaking, with our own extremists to foster misunderstanding, confrontation, and conflict between our two civilizations.
What do you think such conferences contribute to correct the message and the image of Islam in the perspective of the West?
Well, this conference is different than most conferences because it has a specific purpose of allowing Al-Azhar graduates, many of whom serve as imams throughout the world, representatives, to try to benefit from the knowledge of the West that Western Muslim scholars have. And that's why if you look at the program, all of the speakers here, I mean, there are many brilliant scholars here in Egypt and in the Arab world, but all of the speakers are Western Muslims, whether they're of Arab extraction living in the West or they are converts to Islam, but they're all Western Muslims who've grown up and been educated and thoroughly understand Western culture and the way the media works, the way society works, and therefore, hopefully, we will be able to be of service to Al-Azhar and to its scholars, and particularly to those who will enter into dialogue with individuals in the West, that they possibly may benefit from the experience that we have growing up in the West, living as Westerners. I think of myself as a Western Muslim. Not as a Muslim in the West, but as a Western Muslim, as an American Muslim. Not as a Muslim in America, but an American Muslim. And therefore, I share a culture, a civilization with my fellow Americans, just as I share a religious culture and association with Muslims all over the world. So possibly we will be of some help to Al-Azhar. And that's what makes this conference different than any others I know of.
Okay, the campaign against Islam in the West is very severe and very difficult. How can the graduates of Al-Azhar, do you think the school books that they study at Al-Azhar is enough to teach them how can they respond and refute allegations?
Well, hopefully some of the papers that will be given today and tomorrow and the next day will deal with specific ways in which they can approach and deal with the problems that will be posed when they encounter the West. No, I don't think that the curricula necessarily can do that. But that's why Al-Azhar had the extraordinary ability, the self-critical ability to realize that there was a need. And in the letter of invitation that came from His Excellency, the President of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Al-Tayyib, he took note of the fact that it was difficult to communicate. It was difficult for Azharis to communicate in the West and to understand the nuances, the different modes of thought. and the critical apparatus. So hopefully we can be of help.
Okay, how can we correct the image of Islam to the Muslims themselves? Because now Muslims disagree with each other. We live in groups, different sects, different methodology, different way of thoughts. How can we try to make a conciliation between them?
Well, one of the things that strikes me when I read the Quran is the emphasis on behavior. Now, whatever your particular madhab, or whatever your particular school or grouping, that doesn't matter when it comes to behavior, to being polite, to being decent, to showing compassion, to showing mercy, to showing respect for your family, to showing hospitality to the stranger. Now, it's interesting. If all of the practices, of all the behavioral sciences contained with the Quran were absorbed and practiced, that would transcend these differences. As long as we're talking about individuals who want to live in peace with their fellow Muslims. I mean, there's some who don't. There's some who are motivated by extremist perspectives, and really all they want to do is kill their fellow Muslims. But that's a tiny minority. But for most, the behavior of the Muslim, the adab of the Muslim, the fact that we invoke the name of God as the most merciful and the most compassionate more than any other phrase. We say it each time we recite the Quran. We say it every time we speak in public. I mean, there's no phrase that Muslims say more often than Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And if we just remember that in our very lives, in our dealings with each other, to be merciful, to be compassionate, I think that would take care of a lot of the problems.
Some people have increasing and ongoing fear of the West. They don't want to work or cooperate with the West. They have their fear because of the history that they studied. How can we change this image in their minds?
Well, I think the best way is person to person. I mean, that's why it's very good when students from the Muslim world go to study in the West and students from the West come here. Both sides need this education. Both sides are unaware. I mean, people are unaware of the degree of interaction that has been going on for hundreds of years of dialogue and interaction. And they're really, the history of the relation between Islam and the West is not just one of periodic warfare, but it's also of intellectual exchange, spiritual exchange, dialogue, and it's reflected on many levels. And I think that's the first starting point, that people should be aware of that more stress in education should be on the way in which Islam has engaged with every other civilization in the world, and particularly with the Western civilization. It has been engaging with it, and that engagement is of greater continuity than warfare. For every day of war, there have been months of dialogue and living together. The very presence in the Muslim world of millions of non-Muslims who until this century and developments, various complicated global complications, have lived in peace and harmony and exchange and have held high position in Muslim societies, even though they weren't Muslim. That's something we should reflect on. We should reflect, and I think that would be very useful.
Okay, we cannot establish peace on the earth unless the regionalists cooperate with each other. What do you think?
Well, I believe that. I believe that there are two choices now, and that is because the world is much more of a compact unit. You can't turn your back on the fact that many different cultures and civilizations and religions exist. And either we will learn to work together or we will destroy each other. It's as simple as that. Before 9/11, Al-Azhar's global mission was primarily to be of service to the Muslim world, beyond the boundaries of the Arab world, and specifically in Europe and America, to provide, when invited to do so and funded to do so, imams and teachers for those clusters of Muslim communities that extend across Europe and North America. But now, in the light of disturbing misrepresentation and exploitation of what, in a way, is reasonable fear of the unknown, this unknown religion of ours that for so many people in the West appears to only make itself manifest in the vicious bombings in New York, even before 9/11, and after 9/11 in London, Madrid, Washington, and in any number of aborted attempts across the urban centers of Europe, and to a much, much lesser degree, North America. Al-Azhar University would respond to this challenge, and in the words of its president, the university and its graduates have invited us, Western Muslim scholars, to help Al-Azhar develop the methodology and the skills that will enable it to explore fresh approaches to the hearts and minds of intelligent and well-intentioned persons in the West, that they may develop a more reasonable understanding and appreciation of the value of Islam as religion and as a profoundly historic civilization inspired by this religion. These were the opening words of Professor Atayyib's letter of invitation that my colleagues and I received many months ago. These are the words that have brought us here. And talking about words, the words of particular importance to me are found in the very title of this conference, the Muslim Ulama in the West, Bridges of Communication with Al-Azhar. I would suggest that there is a growing receptivity in the West. And here I would speak in particular about America. A growing receptivity to the idea of American Muslims serving as bridges of better communication, of greater understanding, and of mutual respect that will be manifest in joint projects between America and the Muslim world, projects in the field of education, social services, interfaith, dialogue, and job creation. This possibility has already been spelled out in an extensive policy paper prepared over the past 2 years by the U.S. Muslim Engagement Project, driven by staff members from 2 leading conflict resolution centers in America, and led by a bipartisan and multi-faith leadership group of 34 Americans, including a former Secretary of State, a former Deputy Secretary of State, a prominent retired general, 2 former members of Congress, President Clinton's Special Middle East Envoy, the CIO of the Petroleum Institute, which is the Petroleum Industries Trade Association, the head of the largest Muslim organization in America, ISNA, headed by a woman, and the imam of a New York mosque, who is a leading figure in global interfaith activities, a rabbi devoted to ending conflict and achieving justice in the Middle East, a leading Arab-American advocate for Palestinian rights, and the former leader of the most powerful branch of the Israel lobby, who over 2 decades has rethought his position on the Middle East conflict, and now leads a group of major figures from the private sectors of America and Syria, who together are working on reconciliation. Such a diverse group, such an amazing group, would have been unthinkable more than a decade ago, or less than a decade ago.
Brothers and sisters, to increase your iman.
خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا. Learning how to recite the Quran properly, learning the meaning of what we recite, concluding the ahkam from the verses which we recite, trying to implement what we learn in our daily life. We'll listen to the participants and the guests. We'll take your phone calls. We're going to recite live. We'll listen to your recitation. and will correct it according to the rules and regulations which will state in each episode. Now your dream will come true.
Mr. Jacob Bender is one of the speakers of this conference. How are you doing? Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Okay, what's mainly the paper is about? Your paper that you are going to present. I know you are a director and you are doing a documentary film. So can you speak to our camera about this?
Let me speak to the camera. Yeah. Okay. The paper I will deliver here at this conference of graduates of Al-Azhar University, my paper describes the film project I've been working on for the last 7 years. This is a documentary film called Out of Cordoba about the two great philosophers to come out of Al-Andalus, Ibn Rushd, Muslim philosopher and doctor, and Rabbi Musa ibn Maimun, his Jewish counterpart. And my paper is about the production of the film and the long history of Jewish-Muslim cooperation in Al-Andalus and across the Mediterranean. One of the reasons I undertook and decided to make this film is to show that for many centuries Jews found a home in the Ummah, in the Muslim lands, were well treated, were protected by Muslims, and this is a way, an inspiration for those of us who want to create better relations today between Jews and Muslims.
Okay, that's great. But this takes us to the current situation in Gaza Strip right now. Mm-hmm. Are you one of those who are opponent or proponent to what's going on in the conflict between the Israel and the Palestinian?
Right. I think it's very important for Arabs and Muslims to know that there are thousands of Jews around the world, like myself, who are opposed to what Israel is doing in Gaza, who have been for many decades opposed to the occupation of Palestine, the destruction of Palestinian homes, the expulsion of the Palestinian people. We think this does not speak for us. Because we are the followers of the Jewish religion, and the Jewish religion believes in justice, we support the right of the Palestinians to an independent state and to live free of the occupation that Israel has imposed upon them. What is happening now in Gaza is a war crime. The starving of millions of people, the bombing of civilian neighborhoods, these things pain us very much. Not only because they are crimes against humanity, but they are crimes committed by people within our community. And so, because we are Jews, we oppose what is going on in Gaza and call for an immediate ceasefire on all sides and an end to the violence and a reintroduction of the truce, leading to a final settlement based upon the rights of the Palestinian people.
Okay, you are doing a comparison between two main figures of Cordoba, and one of them is a Muslim and the other is a Jew. My question is, what are the common factors that you discovered because of the environment in which they live together, and they are affected by the society in which they live together? How can we get benefits if they find a solution for themselves to live together? How can we get benefit from your film?
When we look at the society of Al-Andalus, we see that one of the values that was embodied in Islamic society during those centuries was what the Spanish call convivencia, coexistence. And so my film tries to inspire people by looking back as a platform for moving forward. If we understand that, one, Jews, Christians, and Muslims live together in peace in Al-Andalus, if we understand that rather than two separate worlds between the West and Islam, we understand that Western civilization has as its basis Islamic and Arabic learning. If we understand that, if people in the West understand that, I think that they will be less afraid of Muslims. They will be accepting of Muslims in Europe, to understand that Muslims and the Islamic faith are not foreign bodies, are not an infection trying to destroy Western society, but in fact, Islam has always been part of the West. In fact, without Islam, there would have been no West, because the Renaissance was built on Arabic and Muslim learning, and that Jews and Christians profited from the Arabic philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine that they read in Arabic and then was translated into Hebrew and then into Latin, and went all over the European universities and educated people about Greek science, about mathematics, and this was part of the creation of what we now call Western civilization. So I want my audiences in the West, in the United States, to be inspired by what they will learn about the contributions of Arab and Muslim thinkers to their own lives, to the lives that they live as people in the West.
You know, the Arab or the Muslims in the Middle East have a lot of fears in their minds because of the bad history that they got from the Christian, the Crusades and the wars in the past. But now the world changed. How can we change such fears in the hearts of the Muslims? What contribution should we introduce to them?
Well, I think one of the biggest contributions that my country has already made was the end of the Bush-Cheney-Rumsfeld torture administration and the election of Barack Obama. I think this shows that America can elect somebody with the middle name of Hussein, a person who is not white, and we hope that this will will bring about a new day in the relations between people in the West and the Muslim world. And I would call upon the new administration of Obama to issue public declarations to say that we in America do not harbor any designs of conquest in the Arab world, that we want to create friendship with people in the Muslim world, that we will not, the United States will not attack Iran, that the oil in the Middle East belongs to the people who live here. It's not the right of the United States to control economically the oil or natural gas wealth of the Middle East. This wealth should belong and be developed for the common good of the people who live here. And finally, the American new administration should take the lead in trying finally to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based upon the international consensus, which has been now adopted by every Arab state and the Islamic world, which calls for an end to the occupation and the bringing into creation of a Palestinian state living in peace next to Israel, which means the withdrawal of all the Israeli settlers from the territories captured in 1967, a shared Jerusalem, and I hope to see one day the flag of Palestine flying over the Haram in Al-Quds. This is my dream as well.
So, but on the other hand, the Westerns do not understand the Arabic culture or Muslims' culture. They always have misconceptions. Sometimes they don't know who are the Muslims, who are their practices, and in many cases we find media campaign against Muslims. How can we solve this problem? Because it always comes into our minds when we watch the movies, the Hollywood or Fox movies. We find a campaign against Muslims, either in representing them in a bad way in their movies. How can we solve this problem?
I think, one, by creating your own media, by talking directly to the Western population, and by making it clear to people in the West that Islam is not a religion of violence, that Islam is a religion of tolerance, as proven by hundreds of years of coexistence that existed between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and Hindus from all the way from Al-Andalus, from Spain to India. The example of Al-Andalus was not an exception within the history of the Ummah, but in fact was the standard. We can only also look at the reign of Akbar the Great, the Mughal emperor, who also based his empire on the idea of tolerance between people of different faiths. I have seen in my work with the Muslim community and working with interfaith groups in the United States that when I go to a mosque and talk, which I have on many occasions, and say that I, as a Jew, oppose the occupation of Palestine, it begins to change the opinion that Muslims and Arabs have about Jews. Likewise, when I have brought to my synagogue Arabs and Muslims, and they say, we believe in peace, we are opposed to terrorism, we are opposed to the bombings in Madrid, in Bali, in London, and in Mumbai. This changes the opinion of people in synagogues and churches about the opinions they have that all Muslims are violent, supporting terrorism. If they hear Muslims condemning violence when it comes from those people claiming Islam as a justification, this opens people's minds and begins to change their prejudice and does away with the Islamophobia that many people in the West have adopted since 9/11 and after the other terrorist attacks. Remember, I lived a few blocks away from where the World Trade Towers once stand. When people saw that and they experienced that, it was natural that they began to be afraid, to hate those people who perpetrated those acts. Likewise, we can only understand the fear, then the anguish and the hatred of children living in Gaza now. How can we expect those children who are living under Israeli bombs to think about Jews in the future? But that's why it's important for your audiences to hear me. And that's why it's important for Jewish and Christian audiences in the United States to hear Muslims talk about peace, coexistence, the rights of women, and why the conception of human rights is not antithetical to Islam, but flows out of Islam, flows out of Islamic tradition that values human life and values freedom as part of their tradition. When I tell people that the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion, this begins to change their mind about what the Quran says.